I wanted to ask both of you, because earlier this morning, President Trump was asked if he was going to call Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota to express sympathy or, his thoughts for the murder of a Minnesota lawmaker and her husband. And he said, no, I'm not going to call Tim Walz. I'm not going to play that sound. Instead, what I want to play is an interview that Sarah just did with the Minnesota Secretary of State, who had a really interesting answer to this question about how members of each party are talking about this. Listen to what he said.
So I think one possible solution here is we've just got to be better about policing our own. Those on the left, police your own. Those on the right, police your own, even and especially behind the scenes. It doesn't have to be a press release. It doesn't have to be a social media post. It can be quiet and no one has to see it. But that's how we're going to get at this problem.
Yeah, and before that, he said there's this sort of, he called it like a 6 scorecard about, whose politicians are getting targeted more, Karen. It was just interesting to hear him say, like, let's just worry about ourselves here and look inward.
Yeah. Look, I mean, John, I think with what we saw over the weekend was just heinous, and the things that we've learned since about how much worse it could have been. There is too much harsh rhetoric coming from both sides. I'm not going to play both sidesism. I do think it was inappropriate, though. It was, as I think this gentleman also had said, it was a missed opportunity for the president. But we don't have a president who is interested in being the kind of peacemaker where you would have heard, yes, I called the governor, and yes, we've said we'll do whatever we can to help. But I agree with the idea that let's just all cut it out. Let's stop, who did what to whom and keeping the scorecard. And what if we could all just stop with the violent rhetoric? Because as we now know, you can't say you don't know it's not going to have an impact, because we're seeing increasingly that it is having an impact. And some of these individuals are citing things that they heard, so-and-so say, well, these people are evil or these people are that. So let's just stop.
But listen, this is not a level playing field. Nobody has a bigger bully pulpit in this country, in this world, than the President of the United States. And I would have thought that Donald Trump had an assassination attempt on himself would have reflected and learned something from the experience. Just compare what Joe Biden, who was running against him at that time, did in comparison to what he's doing now. Joe Biden called Donald Trump and wished him well and called on the country's better angels. Instead, Donald Trump on TV basically calls Tim Walz a wacko and says, no, I don't need to call him. The reason you call a governor and the highest elected official of that state is because they're representative of a state that's in crisis, where a tragedy just happened, a state that is in mourning, because they are the representative. In the same way that when there's a tragedy in the United States, foreign leaders call Donald Trump. And so I'm not going to let him off the hook on this. And I think you don't hold him accountable just quietly. You also do it on TV. You also do it on social media, because we need to demand better from the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States. There are things that should be above politics. And because Donald Trump is saying the things he does, and he's being a jerk, which is what he's being to Tim Walz and the people of Minnesota, is the reason that the senior U.S. Senator from Utah, Mike Lee, can go on Twitter and crack lame jokes about the tragedy in Minnesota and not even apologize or take them down. So, no, I don't think it's a level playing field. I think we have to hold our elected officials far more accountable than we do some French conspiracy theories on Twitter, and they are letting us down, particularly on the Republican side.